it took a while to try and sort things out, and possibly 2 or 3 weeks. And then it was to persuade Tony to come back to Harare. It was a very tasking job, really, because he was so frightened. He imagined himself going into Chikurubi. He imagined all kinds of things, because you didn't have to be guilty of anything at all. I mean, the trumped-up charges that were handed to Stephen, when Stephen told them that they've got the wrong person, this was when he was arrested, and the British consulate had to release him. Tony was terribly frightened, and he felt that he would rather just stay where he was, being in Wales. But anyway, eventually he did take my advice, and he did come out, because by this time I was in fact in Harare at the stakehold offices when I was contacting Tony. So we booked a ticket and he came out, and I think even when he came out he was very sceptical. Wasn't sure how things were going to be planned or anything. And with Marsden running the company down as he did, he never purchased any of the spares or rubberware. He actually stole the money. In the meantime, of course, there was no rubberware to buy for the farmers. Now, when Tony came out, he had to reinvent how he was going to get the customers back, because I think a lot of them had diversed and gone to other people to do their repairs and so on. But what he actually did was, instead of making the milking machines being surge very complicated, which they were not only complicated, but if you had trouble with them, they were also difficult to repair and get working again. And so what Tony did was to make the milking machine as simple as possible for the farmers to be able to use the machines without having difficulties with the equipment. And so he reinvented stakehold, and from surge we then turned to gas going. Now, gas going, in fact, were very excited to have us, and they did absolutely everything possible, with brochures and a flag and different equipment to put on show. So in 1990, our first gas-going show, we really did go to town. The whole structure of the machine was, in fact, simplicity. And I think from then on, the farmers wanted to change and to install the gas-going machine instead. And when we left, the amount of machines that were in the field covered 95% of every milking machine in the country. And I would say that all the bottles of milk that were on the table throughout the country would have been milked by our milking machines. After everything we'd been through, we realized that ZANU PF had in fact once again taken an interest in the company. We now found ourselves under surveillance where the cars were parked on the other side of the road, and then a short while after that a white truck drew up outside Stakehold and 2 police got out. The truck had no number plate, and spoke to Tony for a second and then walked in and took our workers out at gunpoint. We felt terrible, felt very upset for them. We had no idea where they were taking them. And when we spoke to the workers when they came back, they said that initially they were actually had something over their heads, and they, like a cloth or something, and they just drove round and round and round and round for about half an hour, 40 minutes, and then they found themselves ended up in a police station. They then also said that they seemed to be moved from police station to police station. Every couple of days they were moved, but they were also seriously interrogated, seriously tortured. They were really in a very bad state when they returned to the factory 6 weeks later. And happy to see them back, but they were never the same men again. Never, never. A member of government actually told me personally that they could not allow stakehold to be in private hands, that they had to be in government hands. After the meeting, we had a meeting with the National Association of Dairy Farmers. They started to exert all sorts of controls over stakehold, starting with the foreign currency allocations, where we spent it, who we spent it with, even to the extent of contacting our suppliers and discrediting stakehold. It started to have the appearance that ZANU PF and the National Association of Dairy Farmers somehow seemed to be connected. Sometime later they tried to mandate as to who will take over stakehold, and they started to be very bolshy about it. Things got very messy with the relationship between stakehold and the National Association of Dairy Farmers, and the case ended up at the High Court. The judge looked at it and said it was very, very poorly put together, and actually threw the case out of court. Going forward in time, we always had that impression that ZANU PF hadn't really given up. Coming to the sale of stakehold, we really had no choice. Mugabe had passed the regulations that 51% of the shares had to be handed over to the black indigenous. Now the chaps that were running around grabbing all these companies was in fact Mugabe's henchmen, his family. And so they wanted they wanted all the companies. Now, it wasn't a question of even paying you some money for that 51%. When they took over the shares, at 51% of the shares for them and 49% for ourselves, there was no compensation at all. And that applied to everything that's taken place since. They don't pay for them, they just take them. And Nick said to us, well, look, you've got no choice. And he was able to find a black bank manager for our company and our life's work. Now, had we not done that and we stayed on, there would have been every chance that they would have just taken the company and we would have got nothing. So it was very advisable for us to do that. So that is exactly what happened with the sale of stakehold. But as I look back, the deterioration from the time we actually were threatened with stakehold, that it had to be handed to the government because it could not be allowed to be left in private hands. If you could couple the difficulties that we had during the operations with Nick van Gulish running it, it was very sensible. So really our life's work, we've had nothing, really. Got nothing for the farm. And it was a pittance. And the same again for the Norton factory. But I think most of all, I'm very thankful to be here in Britain. I really am. At the time, Nick actually approached Tony that we would have to sell. I think Tony was really very upset because really stakehold was Tony. It was his work, his life's work, and to feel that at the end of the day, instead of enjoying the fruits of his labour, it had to be given away. And the stress that we endured during that period, from the time Mugabe took over, with the troubles we encountered and with the income tax people constantly at stakehold. They thought we were fiddling the books, but they went through absolutely everything. A numerous amount of times. They thought we were fiddling the sales tax, and they thought we were fiddling the actual books and taking the stuff out, but they found nothing. might have found a few little errors of just accounting, but nothing at all. But that was the case. And you know, when you go through that and you've got them sitting in your offices and looking at you, and got John, the clerk, the chief clerk, dealing with the income tax chaps, as I look back, it was very, very frightening. Our last day at Stakehold was the 31st of December 2007. And after that, starting the January, a lot of trouble in the Zimbabwe side from the elections and the killings and everything that had taken place. I think we were relieved to a degree, because we couldn't have gone back to that. And I think we had to settle with the idea that that was the end of Stakehold. And I think from then on it was more peaceful for Dad, because he didn't have the sort of daily run of trying to run Stakehold from here. It was just a question of enjoy our lives and go to places, which is exactly what we did. After Stakehold was sold, I think Tony was very lost. He did say to me that he wished he'd have made different decisions on the setup. But the question, as I look back, could he? It was, you couldn't do anything. You couldn't predict nothing. But he was a lost soul, because Stakehold was Tony, and he devoted his whole life to study and to install. He was always very excited when an installation, when he had to commence an installation that he'd installed. It called for happiness. I mean, sort of a very satisfied feeling. Well, that no longer would take place. But the last few years that he was in the UK here, I feel that as things progressed with the seriousness of Zimbabwe, I think he accepted in the end that perhaps he made the right choice.